Hi, everybody, and welcome to our third workshop of the University of Ethereum. Today, I'm joined with some really incredible guests, and we're going to be talking about tokenizing Ghana. So today, our focus will be unlocking economic growth via Web3. So quick introduction to our speakers who are joining today. First, we have Titus Bawuah, founder of Web3 Accra. He'll be joining as our expert today to talk about the different ways that Ghana is implementing digital currency to help the citizens of Ghana. Next, we have Dr. Jatali Bellanton joining us, CEO of CryptoHedgeFund and seasoned investor and educator. We also have Kwame Oppong, who's joining us, the head of FinTech and Innovation of the Bank of Ghana, and he'll be talking to us today about the digital currency that Ghana is implementing called eCedi. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Del, and we'll get started on his presentation.
Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Welcome in, Del. Yeah, good. Doing really great. If you want to start with an introduction before we go into the presentation, feel free.
So first of all, I'm very happy that you guys invited me. And I love what you guys are doing with this Ethereum University. Obviously, I have a bias and affinity to Ethereum, having hosted Vitalik in Ghana a few months ago with Afropolitan. But essentially, my background, I'm a serial entrepreneur, got heavily involved in crypto around 2014. That's when I mined my first Bitcoins. And to be honest, when I started, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just felt like the whole ethos around blockchain was something that was going to change the economic climate. And having come from a background of real estate and alternative investment, there seemed to be some sort of economic imbalance. And for me, when I first read the Bitcoin white paper, I just kind of read through it and just felt like there was an element of transparency attached to it that was going to make a huge difference. And so, as mentioned, mined my first Bitcoins in 2014, 2015, and unfortunately got hacked. So I got caught in the saga of Mt. Gox. But to be honest, I didn't go into it for profit during that period. We went into it just really interested in the technology. And fast forward, spent a lot of time with emerging technology startups between the UK and the West Coast, and just felt like this was an area or an arena that was worth pursuing. So in 2019, going on 2020 pandemic year, is when I felt that there was a real case to start something in Africa and the diaspora. And I guess my view during that period was that we had 70% of the world's youth in Africa, and there was a real opportunity to, build or capitalize on an emerging industry that could really make a difference on the continent. And so my view was Africa's GDP wasn't performing as high as it could, and Web3 was going to be the way to kind of add economic value to that. Hence why I started Web3 Accra. In addition to Web3 Accra, I also sit on the board of an amazing organization by the name of Arts Help, which is an NGO focused on giving visibility to artists all over the world. We have 20 million followers. We have a partnership with the United Nations and actually creating the first digital climate library in the world, which we'll be announcing and launching at COP28 as of this week. So that's a bit of background on what I do. And I hope to kind of dive in a bit deeper on what we're doing with Web3 Accra and some of the interesting things that we're doing in Ghana as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Del, well, thank you so much for just sharing your history in Web3 so far. And, I've known you now for a couple of years. We actually met back at ETH Denver, which I'm a huge proponent and supporter of showing up to IRL events. And I know you are as well, with creating Web3 Accra and creating more opportunities for people in Ghana to get educated on how blockchain can be leveraged for good. And at the University of Ethereum, that's our whole mission, right? We want to show people how we can solve actual real world problems with blockchain and avoid talking about theoreticals and showing what's actually being done, right? So I think this is going to be a really great workshop today. And I hope for any students listening that you take away a lot from this. And I challenge you to think how you can apply this to solving real world problems. So today, Dell's going to be talking a little bit about the introduction to Ghana and telling Ghana's recent history and explaining some of the current challenges and how blockchain can be leveraged to solve some of these problems. And like Dell mentioned, Africa has 70% of the world's youth. And there's a lot of problems that can be solved with blockchain technology. We'll come back over to Dr. Jatali towards the end of the session to talk more about why education is so important when it comes to mass adoption and teaching people how to use this technology. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up the presentation, and Dell, you can just kick us off here.
Okay, so I think although the focus here is on Ghana, the actual reality here is what the bigger vision for me is really focused on Africa as a continent, to be very honest with you. Ghana just happens to be, my country of origin. But I think, as mentioned previously, is that, 70% of the world's youth is in Africa. If you look at Africa's GDP in the last 10, 15, 20 years, in my personal opinion, it's underperformed. And then, I give you an example. If you look at China's GDP in the last 20 years, I think they've acquired something close to $16 trillion. And you could argue that a reasonable percentage of that has come from Africa. And so what are the youth into these days? It is factual that technology is at the forefront of, what the youth want to use these days. And when you look at how cryptocurrency in particular has performed over the last 5 years alone, it's evident that this is a market that is adding an amazing amount of value to the world's economy. And so ETH has a market cap, arguably has fluctuated between, 300 million to 500 billion since 2016. That's a very, very, very short time span, right? Bitcoin has done even more over the period of 10 years. And so you look at Africa's GDP over a period of 10 years, and it has barely hit, half a trillion, let alone $1 trillion. And so if we are going to make a significant change on the continent, it is going to start by reinventing or adding new industries to our existing industries, which is why for me, Web3 is going to be a very, very important component to Africa's future. I think the other part to this, then, when you now zone in to a country like Ghana, the agenda for the country as a whole is very much focused on digitalizing the country, right? So, Africa is still partially in an industrial era. And for us to move forward, digitalization has to be our priority, right? Whilst also finding very effective ways of consolidating our resources and extracting the value locally. And so, the importance of having Web3 is to not necessarily change and create, these sci-fi-like scenarios, but actually consolidating what we have and managing what we have efficiently so that we can extract the value properly. That, for me, is the reasons why Web3 is so important. And so our institutions are figuring out very, very efficient ways to make their jobs easier, to make consumers have, better value in the local marketplace. And there are numerous examples of how Web3 can make a massive difference in the local economy. In the Ghanaian economy, some of the ways that we're considering using Web3 is, for example, recently, our government has been experimenting with a digital currency, which is called the e-city. And the e-city, although at its very early stages. The reality is that this is something that has actually been built. This is not just a concept. It has actually been built and is being tested in rural areas of Ghana. The other fascinating thing about the digital currency is that it operates, it has the capacity to operate offline as well. And so, the government is definitely thinking in the right ways. And I would say they have a really future-forward approach to seeing how they can make the lives of Ghanaians in the future a lot more efficient. I don't want to dive too much into the ECD because we have Kwame on, who is spearheading, that project. But I just wanted to give an overall view that, this is something that our government isn't just talking about; it's actually doing it, right? And the central bank is, although conservative and very, very cautious, they've been very receptive to the Web3 community because they've identified that there is a need for Web3, not just in Ghana, but internationally. And I guess what they're trying to do is understand how this can work in the best interest of the country, keeping people safe, because at the end of the day, it is no secret that we have had some major issues in the industry, as recent as Binance to FTX, and all these things. When a central bank in particular is approaching an industry like this, they have to move with caution. So I would say Ghana's approach has been very forward thinking because we've actually been able to come together as a Web3 community and the institutions and sit down and discuss effective ways of developing policy in a working group to see how we can make sure that consumers are safe, make sure that we have a competitive market, and make sure that we have a market that is receptive to international partners, as well as being a market that can be the catalyst to develop some creative and amazing entrepreneurs in the space for the future. Web3 Accra has been part of those working sessions, and that's something that the government has been looking at very, very, very seriously over the last year and a half, I would say. And as it stands today, I can confidently say that they're moving in the right direction to actually establish a proper policy for the industry imminently. Now, aside from the fact that we want to put together good policy, we want to create a receptive environment, some of the user cases that are affecting the local economy, and we've internally understood needs to be fixed, are low-hanging fruits, such as land litigation, right? And so you think of some of the issues we have around Africa, land litigation has been a problem for years, centuries, right? And when you think of land litigation, it's usually someone buys a plot of land, it's owned by a family, and it's been passed down from one generation to another. And then eventually someone decides to buy it from the family, and then someone from a previous generation or someone who is aware of the sale comes up and says, hey, I would like to challenge this in court because I wasn't aware that this was being sold. Or in some cases, the plot of land that has been sold could be encroaching on someone else's land, right? And so with the advancements of something like blockchain and smart contracts, right, we have an opportunity to create the kind of infrastructure that would allow us to store land deeds on chain transparently in an open source network. In addition to that, it's worth saying that this isn't conceptual. This is something that is actually within our institutions that is being discussed and finding ways of how this can be implemented. It is being looked at, it has been paused, but it is something that the mere fact that it's been put there and there has been working groups around it, this shows you that, the country's very, very open-minded to seeing how they can solve their inefficiencies within the local economy. And so, I can confidently say to you is that, with land litigation issues internally, there have been very serious discussions on seeing how that can be fixed. From a financial economic standpoint, the Central Bank of Ghana has created an active working group and actively working to see how policy can be put together to establish a very viable credible industry. And last but not least, we've also created the kind of environment where it's easy for international companies to come and at least create awareness on what they're building in the space going forwards. Where we fit into all of this is Web3 Accra works to be an intermediary between the Web3 community and the policymakers, ensuring that the right conversations are being had, the right companies are being put to the forefront, and most importantly, the right awareness is being created so that the industry has a positive, it's given a positive outlook, opposed to, the culture in the beginning of, should I say, the inception of Bitcoin era, where, being a rebel was the way to go because it was us versus them, if you want to call it. But now I think, in Ghana's situation, we have an environment where there are two sides, right, coming together to see what's best, right? Not about who's right, but what's right going forwards. And I think at this stage, I can confidently say Web3 Accra, since we started, we are in a very, 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 very good place with all the institutions who are now receptive to the idea that the industry is here to stay, and also finding ways to, effectively tackle the problems locally. And that's from the ECD, from seeing how blockchain could effectively be used for land litigation, and also finding out ways in which financial products can be deployed to the larger public, and to see ways in which we can add more economic value to the current economy. I think another thing that's worth highlighting in all of this is that I don't feel Web3 as an industry is successful unless emerging economies can harmoniously participate. And why I say that is because in Web 2, that was mainly consolidated by a few companies, right? And then slowly trickled down to other parts of the world. But if you think of decentralization in its philosophy, it is very, very important that emerging economies are integrated harmoniously into this industry. Because if you are able to consolidate Web3 in a way where only a few can access it and only a few can build great economies or great industries out of it, then that would undermine the very reasons why crypto and everything that we say we stand for came together, right? And that's why I admire Vitalik and even some of the other leaders in the industry making Africa part of their agenda. I will challenge entities all the time that don't come to Africa as a place to scale, come to Africa as a place to learn, understand, and see how you can adapt a new philosophy to your own products, right? And that is what I'm most excited about, That is what I'm most excited about. And I would say, the other things I'm also excited about is the fact that, we're on the verge of seeing how we can put a policy together. We will be doing more conferences, upcoming conferences with other key stakeholders and partners that are very interested in seeing how they can find out more on the local economy. And last but not least, we have an opportunity to really rise and bring some talent and put them at the forefront in a way that is going to be very instrumental to the way that the future of Africa looks like in the Web3 space.
Awesome. Well, you covered so much great information, Del. Thank you so much. And real quick, if you could just highlight, what do you think the best pathways for people to get involved are? How can people actively participate, such as students listening today, and get involved and be a part of the solution, and even participate in the future Web3 Accra events?
Yeah, so for us, we keep it very simple. We are on Telegram, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we share most of our updates there. As I said, we are community driven. And so we, pride ourselves on people basically sharing their views. I'm always learning, even though I have the custodian title, right, which is just only a title and that's all it is. I still see myself as a student. I'm consistently learning. So I'll just say to people, if you could join us on Telegram, if you can join us on X platforms as well as Instagram, we always have updates. Please send questions in. They will, we will respond to them. And we also want to find unique ways of how we can, adapt new philosophies in the community. And so we are not, we are definitely not against people from all sorts of parts of the world coming with new ideas when it comes to Web3 Accra.
I love it. I think, Del, the work you're doing is so important. And just to hear that you hosted Vitalik in Ghana and that the Ethereum Foundation is prioritizing expanding to regions like Ghana and Africa, that is really ripe for adoption and has a lot of problems that can be solved with Web3. I think you gave some really great examples on like the land tokenization and helping people also. I don't know how much you went into like the national ID card too, but helping with digital identity and credentialing too. I think that could be really big.
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, Ghana is really moving in the right direction when it comes to digitalization. And, it's a step-by-step process. In the West, things are, I think, Jack Dorsey said it best, just like, things are a luxury, right? Whereas in Africa, Web3 is a necessity, right? And so where we are today, like you said, we've transitioned from a much more manual infrastructure to digital ID cards. And eventually those digital ID cards will lead us closer to an environment where we can adapt more philosophies in Web3, more transparency. Smart contracts will become a lot more effective in the ways that we live in Africa. And I think one important component that I've missed out is education, right? And so education, we are.
And that's where Dr. Jatali can come in too.
Exactly. Education is very, very key here, right? And we have to work out ways in how we are able to make sure that the community is well versed so that the right things are built. And when the right things are built, we'll have better society.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would love to hear from Dr. Jatali and take some time to open this up into a group discussion. Okay, Dr. Jatali, let's talk about educating the next generation in financial literacy and building it into their daily habits. And also, if you want to touch on the national ID of Ghana as well, maybe we can tie it into this. And also, what are the primary challenges, right, when it comes to educating and getting the next generation more up to speed on all of this new tech?
So the first thing I will say is this, right? What I've noticed in the educational space, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, I'm not only just the CEO of a crypto hedge fund, I have been in finance for 21 and a half years. I know I look like a baby, but I'm not. And in that time frame, I'm a former investment banker. I worked in stocks, bonds, everything from options trading to managing portfolios. And then I eventually graduated in a space where I created and became an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, we've done everything from real estate to having this crypto hedge fund where just for people to even join my crypto hedge fund, the base requirement was that they had to learn 2 hours of blockchain, crypto, metaverse, NFT information, so that it's not just putting your money in a fund and watching your money grow. It was really about educating them. And the reason why that was important for me, not just for children and youth, but for adults, was because we are living literally through history, right? If you think about it, I think the first iPod was released in 2001. Okay. And when we think about the history of laptops and computers, I mean, it wasn't until 81 or the 80s in which it was started to go into houses, and it didn't become a common thing for a lot of households until about the 90s, right? So when you think about this short time frame in which how far technology has come, we are watching this happen and unfold with the blockchain, metaverse, NFT, crypto space. And so while there's a lot of fear because of the hacking, but what people forget is that, let's say you have a credit card. Just the other day, I have a cousin who went to Target and she swiped her debit card in Target. And then somebody in Ohio was buying a TV with her card somehow. And, so her information was hacked. And so there are hackers in every space. So people there's this fear mongering in the crypto metaverse blockchain space. But people don't realize that, honestly, if anything, it's almost safer in the crypto metaverse blockchain space because you actually have to sign a contract and give access to your wallet for a hacker to normally hack you. And now they're crafty, like, let's say, for instance, if you were going to MetaMask, instead of putting MetaMask.io, you might put MetaMask.com, and then there was a fake hacker with that website and you didn't realize it. But in reality, most of the time, it's the mistakes that you make that usually get you in that predicament versus a situation, or if you don't own your private key and someone goes bankrupt and the list continues. So we're watching a space that's unfolding, but it's also a space that is not going anywhere. And the same way we've seen the growth in a space where now we can create PDFs and we can create documents right from our cell phone. We could sign contracts. We could do notaries virtually in less than 30 minutes. We don't even have to leave our households. So many things are really home-based. And so when we look at this unfolding space, that is the biggest thing I tell a lot of the youth and adults. And this is why it's important. It's because it's not going anywhere. It's just getting started. And realistically, it's being adopted into a lot of countries' main infrastructures. We just heard about the Ghanaian electricity, right? ECD. But that's just one example. In Nigeria, there was a situation where recently this year, everyone woke up and they're like, we're not using this currency any longer. We're going to be going towards a digital currency, or American dollars are still prevalent. And so it's not just there, but we're hearing about different unions like China, Russia, Africa. We're hearing about different countries that are doing different things. And even when Ukraine had issues in the war, one of the things that we noticed was that a lot of people were donating via crypto and the blockchain. And when they couldn't get access to the money, and we saw a situation where the government was trying to shut down Web3 websites, the people galvanized and were like, that's not acceptable. And within 2 days, I think it was less than 72 hours, we noticed that once again, they lifted all the bans on these Web3 websites. And they were like, you can't ban a Web3 website. That goes against everything that we believe in the digital Web3 blockchain space. And so when we think about just the magnitude of that alone, this is not going anywhere. It's not new. It's still in the beginning, early phases, but it's not new. And it's only growing stronger and stronger. So to answer that question, it's very important that our youth are not behind, because if you're behind, there's going to be a situation where you have like baby boomers who don't know how to use certain laptops or computers and don't know how to work an iPhone, right? And you're going to have them be in part of the world where they're ignorant to it, but it's literally the everyday. The same way at one point people did not believe we would use cash. We would ever stop using cash. But now 90% of people do not walk around with cash in their pocket. They have their credit card, their Apple Pay, even when Apple Pay came out, people were like, Apple Pay, really? Like, I'm not utilizing my phone to pay things. Yeah. And now you go into a store and you just like tap your phone on the screen. It's the convenience. And, people don't really have cash for tips any longer. Now there's homeless people with Cash App and Venmo. It's in Zelle, and it's literally, this is the world, the digital world that we're living in.
Yeah, so you're covering so much great information. On the topic of students and tech, I'm really interested to hear this, and I think this ties into the University of Ethereum and also our students listening today. So you've talked about prioritizing in our previous conversations, teaching the youth how to use laptops and also prioritizing safety in the space for those who have not had extended exposure, right, into the digital space. And Del, feel free to chime in at any point, as this is a group discussion. But yeah, Dr. Jatali, if you want to tee it up, go ahead.
So, I was mentioning earlier, when we talk about something of the nature of just safety in this space, you have to sign a contract to give access. But when you look at someone like my son, right? My son is 8 years old. He likes to play Minecraft. And so when I came across Sandbox, which gives him the opportunity to not just make money in this space, but he could build a house just how he would build it in Minecraft and sell it potentially to someone in another country. It becomes a tool where your child is not just playing a video game, they're playing something that can actually make them money. So now parents can no longer say that you're playing something that's useless, you can't make money playing that game. We're now watching this world where a lot of gamers and video gamers are have endorsement deals, and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars playing games digitally. And so when we think about just how amazing that is, we are now in a space as well that because they are in the metaverse, that there are predators. Unfortunately, any digital world that you're in, rather you're on social media like Facebook and Snapchat, there are going to be things that you might have to be mindful of. But in the same space, They're like, when you're playing Sandbox in certain games, there are going to be people who are adults who might be corrupt, who might be saying negative things. And so it's very important, one, that we're being mindful of who are we engaging? Don't add friends that you don't know. And because someone might be your friend on Sandbox or in that world for like a year playing games with you and you think you know them, or you might be hearing their voice on a digital headset, don't get comfortable and start sending them money and signing contracts that you shouldn't be signing. That's the second most important part, right? Being mindful of reading the contracts that you're signing. Double check the website that you're on. Double check that the contract is a good contract. Did you go onto the blockchain? Did you go onto different websites to make sure that you're checking to see, has this person been reported for fraud? Like, let's say if you're using something like Polygon, which is one of the, compatible Ethereum networks, and then you go to Polygon Scan, and you're checking out to see, oh, I sent money to this person. This wallet address is requesting money from me. Did you go to Etherscan? Did you go to different websites to see who's requesting that money? Did anyone complain about them or report them? How many other people have they requested money from? Does it look like something fraudulent is happening? And as well, just creating like NFTs, keeping in mind that some of the things that you create are permanent in this digital space. So, one of the things that people are forgetting, you for creating cool NFTs and they're expressing themselves via art, or you're saying things digitally, but everything now is on the blockchain. And once it goes onto the blockchain, it is permanent for life. So be mindful of what you put online, be mindful of what you say online, be mindful of who you're playing with, who you're engaging in conversations with, because once again, it's all permanent, or even just how anonymous you are. If your name is Dr. Jatali Bellanton Ethereum, someone can now Google you and know who you are, and maybe even go down a rabbit hole and see what other transactions you've done, maybe try to figure out where you live, who you are, your IP address. So just also being mindful of what name or what information you put of yourself online. I saw this, one of my students, when I told him to create his name, he put his full name and his birthday. And I'm like, you really shouldn't do that, because when you put your full name and your birthday, you're inviting someone who's a hacker to potentially not only know where you live, but your address, and be able to just go down a rabbit hole and figure out who you are in the world. And, you might want to be a little bit more anonymous in this public space. So those are some of the advice that I would give the younger generation that are in this space. I know we're going to also talk about like real estate and other things, but when it comes to that level of security for our younger demographics, that is one of the biggest things I would tell them.
That's really great advice. Just be careful about the information you're putting online. There's also a lot of digital identity tools coming out these days that can really help with, online credentialing and actually proving you are who you are and protecting against things like Sybil attacks. So I think you provided so much good information there, Jatali. And now I want to circle back to real estate, because Del talked about land tokenization, and I've heard of very specific examples and stories in Ghana where this has actually been an issue with the Web2 implementation. A lot of records and land deeds are actually stored physically and not digitally, and that could lead to a world of problems. So, Dr. Jatali, if you want to kick us off, or Del even, and talk about what are some of the challenges that Ghana has faced, or real estate in general, when it comes to land ownership, and how can Web3 be used as a solution for this?
So, Del, do you mind if I tackle first?
Yeah, no, I would like you to, as you are not from Ghana and bought in Ghana. It's a lot more honest.
So the first thing I will say is that the issue that we see in Ghana is not just in Ghana. Like, as a person who has lived in the UK, has lived in America, has lived in Japan, who's lived in Germany, like, I am a nomad. I love to travel. And I've invested in over 7 countries. And so as an investor who has been in an imprint of over 7 countries, I also have friends who have invested in multiple countries. So the first thing I will say, to give you an example, is just recently, as 3 weeks ago, I had a friend of mine who purchased something in Italy. And, she's like, oh my God, you would never guess what happened. I'm like, what happened? And she's like, the property that I bought there, they've actually sold that title to 3 different people and a deed to 3 different people. And the paperwork was forged. So they had this very legit looking paperwork with a seal and everything. And, the name of the person, because, there are, certain countries and certain names are very common. So the name of the person who was on the deed was the name of the person that sold her the property. But apparently they weren't the right person. They were the wrong birthday, wrong year. It was a completely different human being who just happened to have this person's name and was running the scam. And so the thing about that is they would have been able to use the blockchain to see something different, right? And so when we look at Ghana and adoption of this in the block, how we can solve this problem, because it's a problem in America. We were talking about Italy, but I've seen it in America multiple times where there are people who are reselling people's titles and deeds, even in America. And a lot of the states and countries you would think, even like in New York and New Jersey, where they have digital footprints where you're like, oh, I could digital auction, I could buy my property online, and you would think you're safer. But in reality, there are still people who find ways to finagle the system and find ways to resell deeds and titles. So what's beautiful about what's happening with this adoption is that you're entering a space where now it's going to be in a blockchain. And so let's say the government controls that blockchain. The government would be the one to tell you who actually owns this property, maybe even have a picture of the person online so you can know who you're supposed to be dealing with, have the actual title to deed, let you know what the actual price is for the property. Someone can't overbid and lie and say, oh, the price is this, and then meanwhile they're negotiating as an attorney for someone else and that's not the actual price. It just cuts out a lot of the middleman and the rubbish. And so in Ghana, that is one of the problems that we've seen in Ghana where, when you're purchasing a property, sometimes something might take 2 years, right? Like let's say someone owns a property, the title, the deed, they pass away in America and they live there. So now you're dealing with across the world, you're dealing with government, you're dealing with the bureaucracy, you're dealing with whoever now has a property. You might be dealing with different family members who are fighting over the property and believe that they actually have control of this. But while that person's alive, they might have been able to set these things in order. So it's beautiful, the adoption that is happening right now in Ghana, because that is going to lower how many of that rubbish is happening. And, in countries like Nigeria and other places around Africa, South Africa, you might come across it. Certain countries have maybe a better handle on how much of it is happening, and the laws against the crime against doing it. Your penalization is so high that it's not even worth doing the crime. But at that same point, doesn't stop people from trying. And so that's what I love about this adoption, is that it's really going to put a dent in the scamming. And it's really going to put a dent in, even knowing what is available in a neighborhood, what is the actual going price, you having to do the research of the comparables, of knowing what was the other property sold for in some of these countries. And now everything will be on the blockchain. So I am so excited about this. And honestly, the more digital we are when it comes to things of this nature, I feel like it just allows us to do proper valuation, increase the property values at a rate, also know who's monopolizing these communities. Because when we talk about Brooklyn and other communities, people talk about gentrification and, hey, this person came in and bought everything and blah, blah, blah. Did these people and these communities get a chance at these grants that are happening? The same way, now we can maybe even utilize that to be like, okay, well, now we know who has what demographics were able to get certain grants, and know who needs more help, who's not getting in the door quick enough, who's being pushed out, and who needs a little bit, I would say, the cushion of the blockchain as well to allow them to actually do their research a little bit easier. Del, do you want to tag in?
I think that one of the most important things about consolidating land on blockchain isn't just about it being a Web3 component. I think what it does in the longer term is us knowing more about ourselves, right? And so, and what I mean by that, right, is just if you put yourself in a local government's perspective, right, is that how much do you know about their environment you are governing? Okay. And I think you get to do that more efficiently using blockchain. And of course, obviously, the value add is all the other components we're saying, cutting out the scamming and making sure that people are getting the true value. But I think the an even bigger value add is us knowing more about ourselves, right, locally. And I think that's super important,
Okay, yeah. So looking in our recording studio, just waiting to see Kwame pop up here. Yeah, if you want to kick it off, Del, and just say quickly, what is ECD? I'll work on getting him in.
When the government was thinking of implementing the ECD, the whole ethos around it was making sure that there was financial inclusion. And that for me is very, very important because, in Ghana, in Africa, we have a lot of rural areas, and there's often a lot of pockets of bankless areas, right? And when you think of some of the things that have happened prior to us even discussing the e-city, we're looking at what has been done with mobile money, right? The launch of M-Pesa and all these other clever financial products, right? And it was in the same spirit that the e-city was put together. And the objective there is to make sure that there is a financial inclusion, to be able to consolidate the value of the country in a way that is more impactful. And most importantly, also, as I said, thinking ahead into the future, what does the world look like, right? And one of the philosophies I try to always put forward, right, when we're having these discussions is, where is the ball going to be? Not where the ball is today, but where is it going to be? And the steps that the government is taking towards the e-city, in my opinion, is where the ball is going to be, right? But to be honest, I was quite shocked and impressed with how quick they did it and actually started beta testing it, right? Because when I had the discussion, I thought, oh, this is just some, concept or idea that they're just kind of like throwing about in hopes that it will work. But it's actually, built and being tested, and something that they can actually get data from to say, hey, we've tested this for a period of time. But the main man is on now, so let him dive deeper into the
yes, we finally got Kwame on.
Kwame, you're on. So happy to see you.
We're so happy you're able to join us today, Kwame. Thank you so much. We've touched on a couple different ways that Ghana is innovating and using blockchain technology and digital currencies to help create a more equitable and robust financial future for the citizens of Ghana. We will get into the student questions here in the next couple minutes. But Kwame, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself and go into what the central bank's approach is with implementing e-city, feel free to kick us off.
Well, thank you very much. So my name is Kwame Oppong, and Director of FinTech and Innovation at Bank of Ghana. My background is actually initially in the technology space, so a bit of technology and finance, and eventually moved into the development and regulatory space, and ultimately went into full-scale regulation with the central bank here in Ghana. And I just wanted to say a few things. So obviously I wear a regulator's hat, but at the same time, I also have a FinTech and innovation responsibility. And what we're doing in Ghana is effectively looking at what the future of all our efforts look like, right? So our central bank and our government is looking at digitizing the economy for more transparency, for more efficiency, for broader shared growth and prosperity. And in driving it, trying to achieve a digital economy, we're also looking at ourselves as a central bank and saying, okay, what do we then look like in future? How do we execute on our mandate in future? And for that reason, we have to start looking at one of the key things that we do, which is the provision of currency, and see how we can evolve it so that someday we're not the source of inefficiency by providing a physical form factor of money when the economy needs a digital form factor of money. And so we've moved into a space where in 2019, we were one of the first countries to actually test a CBDC. And in fact, we're the first country. China has done something, but there's very limited information on there. But we successfully tested an offline central bank digital currency, where you had people who lived in a very rural area being able to utilize a tokenized representation of the city to conduct transactions in a way that built a footprint for them so that banks and other financial services providers could actually provide services on the back of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're also working on another initiative under our business and border project with Singapore Central Bank. And this is targeted at how we grow SMEs, so MSMEs in Ghana. So Del made some very important points on the education part, which is very important, and Doc as well. We also had an issue, and we still have an issue where MSMEs, small and micro size enterprises, are not able to participate in international trade for obvious reasons. So we've created a tokenized, it's an ERC-based, it's an Ethereum-based system, but architecture, but we basically tokenized the identity and the credentials of MSMEs so that they can participate in international trade, while also locally be able to access credit, which is one of the big challenges that we have in developing markets. And we've recently announced at the Singapore FinTech Festival a partnership to also build the next evolution of that. So the first one was called the UTC, Universal Trusted Credentials. And this second version that we're looking at is adding a different layer of, there's a semi-fungible token using the 3525 standard, but now you can add the additional layer of adding wallets, etc. We're doing these things to be able to intercept our efforts in building a new digital currency. And now at this point, we're going to be able to basically leverage smart contracts and all the other functionalities and Web3 applications that are possible for the future. Then as a final step, what we're doing is we're thinking of the future as being something driven by a decentralized network out there to a large extent, right? And individuals, innovators. And so for that reason, we're actually in the process of undertaking a hackathon, which we had about 88 interesting applications. We've gone all the way down to the final 10 who are currently building and testing their products, and it will be judged. But the idea there is to basically say, you're the ecosystem of innovators. Can we give you this platform? And currently they are testing on a blockchain, frankly, it's a Hedera Hashgraph platform. Can you do something with this? Show us what you can do with it to give us a sense of how we can enable you in future when we issue these digital currencies for the broader economy. And the final bit has to do with education. I'm very happy to hear the comments that have been shared and the work that you're doing as Ethereum University. The reason is whatever we do, consumer protection is important because that's where the trust element comes in. And especially for emerging markets like Ghana, it is important that we all collaborate in educating people as to the appropriate use of some of these innovations so that it can be useful for them over the long term. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Kwame. You touched on so many amazing things that the Central Bank of Ghana and the Ghana government is working on. So actually tying this back into education, we have some students who have joined and members of the University of Ethereum who have some questions for our guests today. So I'm going to start with Fari coming from San Diego. So fellow SoCal person on the call. Fari is a really amazing community builder and very into Web3 technology. So yeah, Fari, feel free to kick us off with your question.
Hello, everybody. It's really great to meet you all. I really enjoyed listening in on this workshop. I'm Fadi, and I've been in the Web3 space for about 3 years now. I'm an NFT artist turned community builder, as I co-founded San Diego's first NFT conference called San Diego NFT Con, where we educated and onboarded over 2,000 attendees with diversity and inclusion at the forefront of our ethos. As I represent Y3K, I represent a community of diverse leaders paving the way to bring access and opportunities to marginalized groups. I also work at a local non-custodial wallet called Edge, which allows users to have direct control over their private keys, in turn enhancing security and providing ownership of their funds. With that, I actually have so many questions coming from so many different perspectives. But, you know, since land tokenization is such a foreign concept to most people, are there educational programs in place to inform the public about benefits and processes of land tokenization?
Yeah, so Fari, nice to meet you. And, you know, congrats on all the work you're doing, you know, with NFTs and launching your first conference in San Diego. Been to San Diego last year. I really, really loved it there. I would say regarding education on blockchain for land, it's premature at this stage because the conversation that has happened so far has been with institutions, right? And it's mainly entrepreneurs like myself and Jatali who usually place these concepts in front of people like Kwame, right? And then what happens is there's this, you know, we have a process, should I say, in places like Ghana where there is, should I say, a period of experimental discussion, right? And that's usually offline discussions with the institutions and the main stakeholders to see, is this something we can actually take to market? And funny enough, those conversations, they actually take it just as seriously as when they go online, right? So in my case, you know, although I'm in a situation now where I'm having discussions with the likes of, Kwame, who heads up our fintech, the reality is that I spent the best part of a year having discussions with him. It wasn't like no easy, stroll to get the Central Bank of Ghana to now get into a position where they're even having working groups, right? And the idea behind that is to acid test what you're saying, right? To ensure that by the time it gets online, you're actually in a position to effectively pitch something that has a good chance of actually working. And so I would say that's probably where they are when you think of blockchain, assisting land litigation issues in Ghana. There's a conversation came up, it got dropped, then it came up again. But I assure you, more than likely, it's probably going to get to the same point we are with the central bank today.
That's great. Thank you so much. At Y3K, we work directly at universities and host events, directly for the kids that are the future, Gen Z, the people that are building, so it's so important that we have access to resources in order to best optimize this technology. So thank you so much for answering that question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming up, Fari. And I think this is a great segue into Y3K. So I'm going to bring up Shayna next. So thanks, Fari. Okay, and we got Shayna here, one of our fellow Y3K members and founder. Shayna is a really amazing person doing a lot of amazing work when it comes to education. She actually gave me my first couple of opportunities to actually facilitate workshops at universities like USC and UCLA, which led me here to the University of Ethereum to do this work. So thank you so much, Shayna.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really awesome because that's all the work we do. I left my job and background in supply chain and business management for consumer electronic manufacturing to be full-time in Web3 blockchain education and doing this work on college campuses for underrepresented and marginalized communities in the States is kind of the highest mission of Y3K and empowering our students. But on a broader scale, we know that there's some real infrastructure that is required to get to that mass adoption. And you guys talked about some things. Of course, a central bank digital currency is one way to get to that. But one of the partnerships we have is with the sovereign nation in the States called Catawba Digital Economic Zone. And they have their own framework for blockchain type of businesses or e-resident digital-based business. I'd love to know if there is similar infrastructure on the LLC Special Economic Zone creation route that's happening in Ghana that supports the smaller entrepreneurs who are creating NFT projects or incorporating it in their existing business in terms of crypto and blockchain infrastructure, and what that regulation has been like, or creating that framework has been like.
So I think there are a couple of things, right? So these are things that are quite interesting. So I've seen some of the things Qatar has done. I think Dubai and UAE has something as well. And in countries like Ghana, and particularly maybe I'll use a Ghana example, I think we're at the stage where our long-term view is to be able to position the country as a hub for fintech more broadly. And in line with that, I think the first thing is to give clarity from a regulatory standpoint as to how the country views the emerging technology. So in addition to working with resources and partners like Web3 Accra, who've been very instrumental in bringing the right partners to the table to have a conversation about what a framework can look like from a regulatory standpoint, we're in parallel also enabling innovators to come into our sandbox. So if you look at the publication of the Bank of Ghana sandbox, it makes it very clear that we want to see innovation from the blockchain or blockchain innovation in a sandbox. Now, in addition to that will be elements of some government interventions to be able to create that kind of hub environment. And one of the things that I think is going to be part of our roadmap is one, to include our Investment Promotion Council, and two, our Ministry of Finance actually put a policy in, I remember at the height of COVID, and we worked with them on this, on Ghana's long-term financial inclusion strategy in a digital payment roadmap. And I believe there was another element that had to do with a payment digitization roadmap. And there were some aspects that were actually embedded in there, not specifically looking at the time at blockchain or Web3, but very well positioned should it materialize to enable that exact concept. But the last part I should add is, as things have evolved, we see some opportunities that we want to take advantage of. And so next year, we're trying to even have a summit to have a conversation with the global community. So we're having a summit called 3I Africa Summit, Investments, Impact, Innovation, and Impact. Innovation, Investment, and Impact. Web3 will be curating some sessions in there as well and some aspects of it. And we're trying to invite the world to see what's actually happening on the ground as well, right? There's an amazing community out there that is using Web3 to do some interesting things. I mean, I met this young chap in one of the accelerators. I think he's graduated, and he's in Ghana providing services to merchants in the US with about 30,000 customers. And I thought that was incredible. Wow. We're at a point where these are the things we need to showcase in order to get the right partnerships and the right conversations going to be able to develop something that perhaps is better suited to what you would want to see. But that dialogue needs to happen on soil with the ability to understand both sides of the conversation, so we can work together to do something that is useful for everyone over the long term.
Yeah, so I'll bring up next, we have Thane coming up on the stage. And after this question, we'll go into our closing thoughts and final thoughts from the speakers.
Hello, Kwame, Del, and Dr. Jatali. It's a pleasure to meet you too. My name is Thane Douglas. I'm from San Diego, California, and I'm currently a freshman computer science major at Howard University. I'm also part of the CARSTEM Scholars Program here, which is a pathway to PhD academic pipeline. And this summer, we actually had the privilege to go to a Ghana study abroad experience for 2 weeks. And with my time there, I saw one digital currency app you guys use a lot, at least I encountered, was Momo. And one of my questions is, what obstacles do you face mobilizing users from CETIs to on-chain currencies? And have you considered conducting user experience research tests with these technologies? I also was wondering what urban communities and suburban areas in Ghana do you likely see growth with fintech solutions in the upcoming years?
So I'll answer part of that. One of the issues that where I see often in this space right now is just the lack of education as to what is crypto, what is digital money, and educating people in regards to that. So that's part of why BNB Meta was created. So, we have a finance curriculum that's gone into over 400 schools around the United States. And then now we're starting to go into African countries, European countries, and this continues. And so as we've expanded, I realized that the crypto, blockchain, metaverse, NFT space, digital money space needed its own department because it is so vast that it's not just a one class, right? It's not just a 1 hour class. And, with our finance curriculum, we do 9 modules and each module is 1 day, right? So you have maybe 9 days of classes spread out between 8 to 12 week period. Whereas now we're specifically creating a module that is only 9 to 10 module, specifically just on blockchain, metaverse, NFTs, teaching you how to do an NFT in 30 minutes or less. But when you're now looking at the digital space, the biggest thing is you have so many people saying that crypto is a scam. You have so many people saying digital money is a scam. You have so many people that are just creating this fear of being hacked and how many people have lost their money. Or if you lose your private key, if you have a hard cold wallet and you lose that, then you lose all your money. And so you're taking people who are hearing these things when they Google this, and now you're telling them this is what we're going towards, right? And then we're teaching them the difference between an exchange and what is a wallet versus an exchange. Now you're educating them. So that's the biggest thing right now, is educating the masses in regards to what are the differences. How do you protect yourself? The different layers that you can have. Also educating them that it is not a scam. Also explaining the difference between a meme coin and a stable coin like Ethereum and Bitcoin versus something like Dogecoin, right? Because that is part of the fear, right? When you hear things of a coin that just 1 minute it was up and people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars, and next minute it completely crashes. But then it's just like the stock market. There are meme stocks, right? We saw what happened with GameStop. If you're not educated, then you might enter at the wrong time because you're just jumping into a trend, not actually understanding what you're investing in. So the first ladder of that is education. The second ladder, I would say that would be more of a Dell question as to some of the ways we're implementing it besides workshops and classes and making sure that the mass understand that.
Yeah, well, we are getting to the end of our time here. So I do want to give everyone an opportunity to give their closing remarks and share any resources for students today. But yeah, we can come back to Thane's question. I just want to give Del a chance to give his closing remarks because I know he has to jump.
Yeah, so I think, as I said, at Web3 Accra, what we've tried to do to influence what the question you just asked is create an environment where we can create leaders in different parts of the country. So I know you may not necessarily be familiar with the local demographic, but for example, some of the universities in places like Kumasi, which is, the Ashanti region, 4 hours away from Accra, I consistently get messages in the group, of hackathons that are going on there, and even some of the international companies, right, that create a lot of educational symposiums in that part of the country. And funny enough, to what Kwame said, you'll be surprised with some of the things that have been built there. And then when we eventually have our Web3 Accra conference, and then they come over and you're asking builders to show you what they built, sometimes I'm in shock because, during the period where everything is kind of like quiet, you are communicating, but sometimes you're not seeing in real time what is actually being built. And I would say that, what that's done for me personally is push me and encourage me to think of how we can really expand regionally. So for example, when Vitalik came, he wasn't just in Accra, he looked at other places outside of the capital city. But I think fast forward, when I think of how this works further down the line is the testing and the experiments of what is being built and how it should be utilized should definitely be tested in the more rural areas, right? For the bankless, right? And those who typically have to, use Web3 as a necessity opposed to a luxury. I think we're probably going to have a lot more impactful user cases through that. And which is why, something I'll let Kwame add to is that the institutions like the Bank of Ghana are doing their beta testing, not just in Accra, but outside of Accra, so they can get real life scenarios out of their testings. My closing remarks on this is really the fact that, the foundation of decentralization was to basically bring a fair playing ground to everyone, right? To bring transparency and ultimately to foster the kind of economy that would bring, unilateral prosperity to society. And I feel like when we are having these conversations, it shouldn't only be looked at as we're in Ghana and you're in the US. I think it should be looked at as we are one hub searching for the same outcome. And I think with that, there should be, from our side, we're very, very open to see what experiments and what things can be tested in the market, and vice versa. I would love to share some of the talent and things that we come across with your community going forwards. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely, Del. And I know you have to drop off. So the best resource for students to go to and get involved will be Web3 Accra's website, right? Web3Accra.com, as well as Twitter, Telegram, and Instagram as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So closing thoughts from you, Dr. Jatali and Kwame. If there's any parting words of wisdom you want to share with our students today and resources, feel free to start now. We'll start with Dr. Jatali.
I just would like to just remind everyone, as we're talking about Ethereum and these different things, when we look at, especially like the NFT space, I noticed someone earlier was mentioning that, BME Meta, we do a lot to go into colleges. We have professors who are proficient in the space, who are part of the Richard Hart, phrase and different things, and have had certain like levels of success in this space as far as what kind of tokens they've invested in, who now go in and who are like, hey, you know what? I've successfully been on Ethereum and have dealt with gas fees, and I've learned all the tricks, and now going to the school systems and teaching these things. And so the first thing I would say is, my first tip is, if you are in a situation where you're not feeling like the information is enough in your school, reach out to BME Meta, reach out to Web3 Accra, reach out to Kwame and different professors and different educators who are able to actually bring in the people that you want to see come into your school. Even if your school doesn't have a budget, you never know. Like, we created a whole department for a specific budget for areas where the schools are not allocating the funds for this particular kind of education. So that's one. And the second thing I would really say is that don't sleep on the access that you currently have and the power that you have, because realistically, the beautiful thing about something like the NFT is, like NFTs and the metaverse and the blockchain spaces, the level of control you have of showing your narrative, right? Because now you're controlling your narrative. You're able to say, hey, I created this piece of art and 300 people have purchased it, or 50 people have purchased it. They've all purchased it at $1,000, and now I'm charging $2,000 for it. And when we have that level of control in this space, or just the ability to say something like, hey, I went on Unstoppable Domains and I bought my domain, and I went on Ethereum and I got my Ethereum, and now I've simplified maybe how I receive money. Or now I can get money instantly and I don't have to go to Western Union. There's just so many different ways that this is now integrating into our lives, right? You can instantly send money within seconds to your family members around the world. When we saw COVID happen, people like Philippines were playing games, metaverse games, where they were actually playing PTE, right? Play to earn. And they were able to make money to actually convert into their local currency and buy bread and milk. So when I tell you this is not a game, this is something that I'm happy you guys are serious and you're looking at it and you're already doing beautiful work like Y3K, but also just keeping in mind, what is that next level? What solutions can we do to make those movements a little bit easier and control the narrative a little bit better?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jatali, for joining and providing some of your insights on education, real estate, and just highlighting some of the challenges that blockchain can help to solve. And that's what we're all about at the University of Ethereum. I want to give Kwame a chance to give his closing thoughts and any resources where people can get involved and be a part of the solution. I will say there have been some questions coming in from the YouTube live portion of our session. So I'll name one question here before we close out. Invest Africa is asking, is there any place where we can see some of what Ghana is working on in the area of blockchain integration and regulation of companies in the space? And Kwame, I think that's a great question for you.
Oh, thank you very much. So I think you can go to the Bank of Ghana website, bog.gov.gh, or you can just search eCity, and you're going to see a couple of things. And when you go to the Bank of Ghana website, you're actually going to see a sandbox framework. And you're going to see the highlights around our areas such as blockchain innovation and all the other information. So we actually have a report on the pilot coming out very soon on the eCity. But one of the questions that I wanted to also add to was Shane's point about the eCity itself. And it ties into my closing remarks. So with the eCity, our focus on making sure that we drove to the far western part of the country was to ensure that we're capturing the most beyond the last mile, if you put it right, if I can put it that way. So really, you're not leaving anyone behind in the development of this new innovation and this new form of currency. And similarly, my advice and my encouragement to this community will be, blockchain is amazing. At this point, I think we can all acknowledge the fact that it will play a role in our economic and social future, period. And so it's a question now of, can we find ways to ensure that as we do this, we continue to adhere to the same time-old principles, do it with the consumer at the center to ensure that they are protected, there's value being driven for them, and ultimately it will serve as a long-term value for you, whether as a business or as a not-for-profit, because ultimately if you're delivering value, they are going to reward you with patronizing your services, and the impact you can get from that would be such that even unlikely stakeholders are likely to partner with you because you're on to a good cause. And I think this is something that we're all excited about supporting to make sure it can be developed safely as well. So thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure having a discussion on this.
Absolutely. And yeah, I want to thank everybody that joined in today, our students, Dr. Jatali, Kwame. You all provided such incredible information. I think Del had to drop, but Del, if you're listening to this, we're really appreciative for you joining today as an expert of the University of Ethereum. And yeah, we will continue this conversation in our Discord, and we challenge all of our students and members listening to actively engage and participate in the discussion, get involved and be a part of the solution. And yeah, we will see you in the Discord and on our future workshop next week.